I'm Alexa. Let's jump in. Today I went up to my garden plot that I have through my city, and I got my final harvest of this season, and it's quite pathetic. It is one tiny little kohlrabi. That's what this is. I've never had kohlrabi before, though it's really cool. This is actually made up of where the leaves grow. As each new leaf grows out the top, part of the leaf becomes part of this bulb, and you can see where they all are, and you can see in the middle the new leaves where they would grow. So it's quite cool. We'll see what I can do with that. I'm guessing I'm gonna boil it and do something with it. But because it was the final harvest, I decided I would do a little bit of a summary of what I learned this year. This is only my second year having a garden, again, through this free plot through the city. And I did learn quite a few lessons. So number one, write down the dates that you sow the seeds, whether that is inside or outside, whether you start them in your house in a pot or whether you put, and then if you start them in a pot and you plant them outside, write down that date as well. I fell into an issue where I was trying to calculate if it says 65 to 70 days to harvest. I was trying to figure out where I was in that time, and I did not feel like, based on the dates, I knew it must have been. I was like going back through photos to see when I actually transplanted stuff and stuff like that. And direct sowed the corn outside, and then that didn't line up with the 65 to 70 days for some of these things, or some of them are 85 days, some of them are 60 days. So write it down, and then write down how many days the packet says until harvest. It'll help you out in the long run. The second thing that I learned is I need to plant more corn plants. So I didn't realize that you need a large amount of corn plants, and I also didn't realize that they have to be as close together as they do. So they basically have to be, I think it's a foot apart, 8 to 12 inches. You don't want them too close, like 6 inches. So it told me to sow them 6 inches apart, which I think that's what I did. But that's actually too close as they start growing taller. So you want to make them a little further apart. I didn't realize that. So next year I need to plant them a little bit further apart and do 2 or 3 rows of them. So I won't get it's probably going to be 24 plants total, whereas this year I had 12, but it'll be in 3 rows or something. So that is one of the things that I was sort of reading up on, watching videos, whatever, YouTube. They have to be close enough together that when they tassel, and they have to be planted at the same time, so they tassel at the same time, so that the tasseling is when essentially, I don't know if it's pollen, but let's call it pollen for the sake of this. They sort of like emit the pollen, and then it has to sort of rustle through with the wind to the other plants within it, but it can't technically go a huge way. Although I have heard about the wind carrying, for example, GMO crops pollen into organic things miles and miles away. So yeah, that kind of shocked me, but I think one of the reasons I've had issues with my corn last year and this year was I just didn't have enough planted together. And I planted more this year than I did last year, but it still didn't seem to, I think it needs to be in a couple of rows. And yeah, so that was a lesson I learned. The third thing will be planting my seeds inside sooner than I did, which means I have to make a decision on whether I actually want to do gardening sooner. Otherwise, I waste seeds growing them and I'm like, just kidding, and throwing them out, right? But for the broccoli and the cauliflower, I also have broccolini. I'm going to probably do the beets starting indoor next year. I planted the broccoli and the cauliflower when they were probably about 6, maybe 8 inches high at most. They had maybe 4 leaves each, and that should be fine. You should be able to plant certain things. So the broccolini seeds and the beet seeds say you can plant them directly into the ground. You don't need to pre-grow them. But what I've found is when they're that tiny and it's that early in the year, they're one of the sweetest baby leaves around. And the rabbits came, and literally every time they grew a couple leaves, the rabbits ate them. So I think if I start them earlier and they look more like the plants you can buy at like a Home Depot or wherever, where they're more like a foot high and extra leaves, I think that'll give them a much better chance of actually taking and not getting eaten as much. So what happened in well, this brings me to my next point. My next point is I have to stay on top of the weeding, and I was doing really, really well. I had got the plot almost perfect through just doing a little bit every time I went, a couple days a week. I was going, and then, once you finish at one and you start at the other, and you just keep going sort of in sections. And then there was this sort of, I think it was like 2 or 3 week period where we had a ton of rain, and it was always on the days that I had the time to go to the plot. So I didn't go because I'm not interested in going out in the rain. It's just not my thing. Like, I don't mind going out and dancing in the rain when I'm going out to specifically dance in the rain. But when you're going to garden and you get wet and miserable, I don't like that. So it just exploded with weeds, and there was other stuff that affected it. So I was meant to get a 10 foot by 10 foot plot. I got 2 of them, so it would be 10 by 20, but they actually only plow 1 strip. So that's only 6 foot wide. And so really there was 2 feet on either side that I should have probably dug them up or put something down, like a thick plastic or like that weed fabric, maybe a couple layers of that, just because that grass, when they were mowing the grass on the field around these plots, they would leave a space between the edge of where your plot is and some of the grass, so like 4-6 inches. But then as that grew higher, they'd leave even more. I ended up with like 1.5 feet of freaking overgrown grass all the way around this plot, and it just encroached very quickly. And I think if that was kept under control better, it wouldn't have caused the problem that I had with my squash plants, my pumpkin, my butternut squash, the watermelon that grows on a vine, the cantaloupe. I don't know that the grass and the weeds themselves were like choking the plants out. I don't think that was it. But I think what they did is they kept a lot more moisture on the leaves and blocked some of the sun. And the leaves, I noticed it on one pumpkin plant first. It started getting white spots, which turned to black, and then the leaf died. And after it had one, it sort of just spread all the way along all of the things of the plants. And then I noticed on the next plant, and then a little while later on the watermelon plant. And then I think pulling the weeds out disturbed I think they're called vines, but like as the pumpkin plant grows the vines out, they have the little feelers that attach to stuff. I'm sure there's some little roots that might grow. I think it just got disturbed and didn't like that with all of the weeding. It took me like 3 different visits, an hour a visit, and I had shears, and I was just manually chopping down this fence of flipping grass and stuff, and then pulling all the weeds out from the actual plot. Staying on top of the weeds, very, very important. I would like to look into, instead of letting the pumpkin and the squash and everything just sort of grow out and around and all that, I'd love to try and find, I know where to find them, but those sort of conical wire things that people put over tomato plants, and then the plant grows up and it holds so that they don't just fall over to the ground when the tomatoes are on them. I think something like that might actually work with some types of squash. I've seen it used with zucchini and butternut, and I've seen some like real hefty, probably 3-pound, like huge zucchinis hanging off of these things that are on these frames. I think that would help because it is a limited amount of space. And so if I can get it to grow up and then back down again, I think that would, instead of it spreading out, 2 foot up and 2 foot back down, would be 4 foot across if it was just on the ground. So I was sort of thinking about maybe trying to figure something like that out. I've seen similar things done. The person who had the plot next to me did a sort of trellis for her cucumbers, and they would grow up the top of the trellis, and then the cucumbers would, with the weight, would grow underneath it, so you could quickly break them off when you wanted to harvest them. The peas, I did really like the way those turned out. So I started them inside. I planted them outside when they were about 10 to 12 inches high, lots of leaves on them. That worked out perfectly. So I'll do that again. I might start a second set, like a month after I plant the first one. Again, going back to my very first point, you need to write down the dates of stuff, because I couldn't figure out exactly when I had planted things. And I mean, I did figure it out within a couple of days. I knew it was within a certain range of time. But the internal plants, I definitely want to plant them inside sooner, have them grow bigger before I plant them outside. And along with keeping the weeds under control, I need to figure out a fencing system. So with them being so new, and then they were eating those new leaves, I mean, I don't know if other people like this, but I like spring mix when I do salads. I don't like full grown like spinach. I don't like a lot of lettuce, but I do like a spring mix because they're smaller and sweeter and younger, right? Like you pick them when they're newer. And I'm like, well, the rabbits like that too. They like their spring mix. I think growing them inside, making sure I have a fence. The fence is going to be a big thing. I do have some ideas for that. I had actually bought some fencing, and then I had an issue with it. And then again, the grass was already starting to get to be an issue. And I was like, well, how am I going to get in and out and deal with this grass? And like, it just got, to be very honest, a little bit overwhelming. And it was in the middle of July, and it was super hot. And I kind of figured out what I wanted to do. And then we went into this rainy couple weeks, and I was like, well, now it's too late. Anyway, it was a whole thing. So you live and you learn. And really, the entire point of me having this garden was not for me to get a whole bunch of food, although I was very happy to be able to share some the carrots and such with other people. I was able to share some, so that was very nice. I felt good about that. That was fun. The point of this was to get me out of my apartment, out into to nature, you know, a little bit. And I know it's not really wild nature, it's cultivated, but it's still outside, and it's in a really beautiful place. So I did enjoy having that opportunity, and will probably, I mean, at some point in the future, I'll be doing another garden. So these lessons, if it's not next year, which it probably will be, but if it's not, I can at least take these lessons forward to whenever it might be. And then the carrots, that worked out as well. I don't really know what I did different this year from last year, but it worked. So we're going to just do it again next year. And then the very last thing is, I think I need to look into complementary plants. So I know that you plant marigolds sort of in a fence around your garden plot, and it can keep they have a very, very pungent, it's not really a very nice smell, but a very pungent smell. And I think that can keep some critters away. But I was wondering if there is stuff, so I'm going to have to do some research on this. The broccoli, this is what happened. So probably the end of August, the start of September is when I pulled in the last of the carrots and the peas and the few little corn that I did get. I'd got the pumpkins in mid-August. And I was like, well, there's really nothing left. The corn plants that I had planted later, like I could give them more time. The broccoli and the cauliflower plant, there must have been other good stuff out there to eat. So the rabbits stopped eating them and they were growing. And I was like, well, I still have 6 to 8 weeks left until the end of October when I have to get everything out. I'll let them grow. So I've basically just been leaving them, letting them grow. And I went up there today, and they're not going to be ready by next week. So I did actually clear the entire plot out. You have to take all of the organic material out. So my plot is back to essentially how I found it. But these things were not growing. I honestly was about to pull them, and I was like, well, I'll do the pulling next week when I get the last, I think I had 10 more carrot plants to pull or something. And the turnips. Oh, I've forgotten about the turnips. I got quite a few turnips, which was very nice. And when I went back, the rabbits were not eating them anymore. They were eating something else from another plot, obviously. So they're growing. So I was like, okay, well, I'll leave them to grow. But what I've noticed is that they got a lot of little holes in the leaves. And I actually saw them today. They're these little, I don't know, quarter-inch green little caterpillar type things on them. And I wonder if there's some way of keeping them off them. It has to be organic, it has to be natural. I do think and wonder if by having it get overgrown with the weeds, if you can hear banging right now, there is apparently a fireworks show going on at my local high school, which I did not know about. So if you heard that, I apologize. My cat just like jumped off the bed in fear. Baby, it's okay. Kane, it's okay. The big noise outside, huh? All right, well, this is real life. I didn't want to make this one go too long, but I do want to figure out if I can find complementary things. And then I think the weeding will help keep, they've had to get there some way. And I'm not sure they would cross a whole bunch of dirt. I think that because there was plants and cover growing and touching my broccoli and cauliflower plants, I think that they crawled over the other plants to them. I think that's probably a little bit more likely. So I'm wondering, I'm going to have to look into that and see if I can learn something for next year. But lots of good lessons, lots of successes, but also lots of failures, which is fine. Again, it was not about being perfect. It was not about being the biggest producing garden plot. It was simply about having fun, learning something new, and getting me out of my house on a regular cadence, my apartment, and more fireworks going on. So I will leave that here. If you made it to the end, thank you as always. I hope you learned something along with me, and I will see you on the next one.